I was signing the final paperwork to transfer my veterinary practice to my son when my phone rang. Dr. Margaret Chun, the emergency vet across town, was calling to confirm the euthanasia appointment for Bailey, my 8-year-old golden retriever, scheduled for that afternoon. I stared at my phone in confusion, my pen frozen above the signature line. I had never made such an appointment. Bailey was sleeping peacefully at my feet, healthy as ever. When I told Dr. Chun there must be some mistake, her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mrs. Harrison, I think you need to know something. Your son has been calling our clinic for weeks, insisting your dog is suffering, and that you're too emotionally attached to make the right decision." The room spun around me as I realized the son I was about to entrust with my life's work had been planning to kill the one thing I loved most in this world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Catherine Harrison, and at 61 years old I thought I understood betrayal. I had survived a difficult divorce when my son Daniel was just 12, built a successful veterinary practice from nothing, and weathered the loss of both my parents within a year of each other. But nothing in my 30 years as a veterinarian, healing animals and comforting their owners through impossible decisions, had prepared me for the moment when I would discover my own child plotting against me. That Tuesday morning in September started like any other. I woke at sunrise in my cottage in Asheville, North Carolina, with Bailey's warm body pressed against my side. He had been my constant companion since I adopted him from a shelter 3 years ago, after my divorce was finalized and the house felt too quiet without another heartbeat in it. Bailey wasn't just a pet. He was the reason I got out of bed on difficult days, the warmth that greeted me after long surgeries, the non-judgmental presence that listened to all my fears and doubts without offering advice I didn't want. Daniel had called the previous evening asking if we could meet at my clinic to discuss the transition plan. At 35, he had finally finished his veterinary degree after years of false starts and career changes. I had paid for his education, supported him through 3 different graduate programs before he settled on veterinary medicine, and welcomed him into my practice 2 years ago with genuine hope that we could build something together. He's finally found his path, I had told my best friend Linda. He's finally going to settle down and commit to something. Looking back now, I can see how naive that hope was. Daniel hadn't found his path. He had simply identified the fastest route to taking over something valuable that I had spent 3 decades building. That morning, I made my usual breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, sharing bites with Bailey as I reviewed the day's surgical schedule. I had 3 spay procedures, 2 dental cleanings, and a difficult conversation with the Johnsons about their elderly cat's kidney failure. It was a typical day at Mountain View Veterinary Hospital, the practice I had built from a single examination room into a full-service animal hospital with 4 veterinarians, 10 technicians, and a reputation that brought clients from 3 counties. Daniel had been pressuring me for months to consider retirement, suggesting that at 61 I should be thinking about traveling, relaxing, and enjoying life instead of working 60-hour weeks. "You've earned a rest, Mom," he would say with that concerned expression that I now recognize as calculation rather than care. "Let me take over the difficult cases. You should be playing golf, not doing emergency surgeries at midnight." The thing was, I loved my work. Every animal I healed, every owner I comforted, every life I saved gave me purpose and satisfaction that no vacation could match. But Daniel had been persistent, wearing me down with arguments about my age, my health, and my supposed inability to keep up with modern veterinary medicine. He brought in articles about veterinarians working into their 70s and 80s, then pointed out how those articles always mention the risks of declining skills and slower reaction times. He introduced me to financial advisors who talked about the value of my practice and how much wealth I was sitting on without enjoying it. He even arranged for his wife, Melissa, to take me to lunch and express concern about how tired I looked, how I seemed to be losing weight, how she worried I was pushing myself too hard. I had started to believe them. Started to think that maybe I was being selfish by holding on to the practice when Daniel was ready and eager to take over. Started to feel guilty about not retiring gracefully and giving him the chance to prove himself. That Tuesday morning, I had finally agreed to sign the papers that would transfer majority ownership of Mountain View Veterinary Hospital to Daniel, with me staying on as a consultant for 1 year before full retirement. The paperwork was spread across my kitchen table, prepared by Daniel's attorney, with neat sticky notes indicating where I needed to sign and initial. As I read through the documents one more time, Bailey lifted his head and looked at me with those soulful brown eyes that always seemed to understand exactly what I was feeling. "What do you think, boy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. "Am I doing the right thing?" Bailey's tail thumped against the floor, which I took as encouragement, though looking back I wonder if it was actually a warning. Dogs have instincts about people that we ignore at our peril. Bailey had never been entirely comfortable around Daniel, always keeping his distance and watching him with a wariness I had attributed to Bailey's difficult past as a shelter dog. I should have paid more attention to what my dog was trying to tell me. At 9 o'clock, I loaded Bailey into my car for the drive to the clinic. He loved coming to work with me, greeting clients and providing comfort to nervous animals in the waiting room. The staff adored him, and he had become something of a mascot for the practice, featured prominently on our website and social media pages. "Good morning, Dr. Harrison," my receptionist Jenny called out as we entered through the back door. "Daniel's already here. He's in your office." I found Daniel sitting behind my desk, which immediately struck me as presumptuous even though I was about to sign over ownership to him. He was dressed in an expensive suit rather than scrubs, his dark hair styled perfectly, looking more like a corporate executive than a veterinarian who should be preparing for morning appointments. "Morning, Mom," he said, standing to give me a brief hug that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. "Ready for the big day?" "I suppose so," I replied, setting my bag down on the chair. Though I have to admit I'm feeling more emotional about this than I expected. "It's natural to feel sentimental," Daniel said smoothly. "You've poured your heart into this place. But think about all the things you'll finally have time to do. Travel, hobbies, maybe even dating again." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Melissa and I were thinking you might want to take a cruise. We could help you plan something special." As he spoke, I noticed he had already rearranged items on my desk, moved my family photos to make room for his laptop, and changed the position of my chair. Small things, but they created a feeling of displacement, as if I were already being erased from my own office. "Before we sign anything," Daniel continued, "I wanted to talk to you about Bailey." My hand instinctively moved to touch Bailey's head. He was sitting beside me, as always, his presence a comforting anchor. "What about Bailey?" "Mom, you know I care about you, and that's why I have to be honest about something difficult." Daniel's voice took on that concerned tone I had heard so often lately. "Bailey is getting older, and I've noticed some signs that concern me as a veterinarian." "What signs?" I asked, confused. Bailey had just had his annual checkup 2 months ago, and received a clean bill of health. Daniel pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "I've been documenting some observations. Difficulty standing, reluctance to play, signs of pain when moving." "Mom, I think Bailey might be suffering more than you realize, and your emotional attachment might be preventing you from seeing what needs to be done." I looked down at Bailey, who was wagging his tail and looking up at me with bright, alert eyes. He showed no signs of pain or discomfort. Just this morning, he had bounded down the stairs and played fetch in the backyard with his usual enthusiasm. "Daniel, I think you're mistaken. Bailey is perfectly healthy." "That's exactly what I was worried about," Daniel said, his voice taking on an edge of frustration. "You're too close to the situation to be objective. As your son and as a veterinarian, I think we need to seriously consider quality of life issues before Bailey's suffering gets worse." The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. The caller ID showed Mountain View Emergency Veterinary Hospital, a 24-hour emergency clinic across town that handled after-hours cases for several local practices. I answered, expecting a referral or consultation request. "Mrs. Harrison? This is Dr. Margaret Chun from Mountain View Emergency. I'm calling to confirm the euthanasia appointment for your golden retriever Bailey, scheduled for 3 o'clock this afternoon." My blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, what? There must be some mistake. I never made an appointment to euthanize Bailey." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "According to our records, your son Daniel Harrison called last week to schedule the appointment. He indicated that Bailey was suffering from advanced hip dysplasia, and that you were too emotionally attached to make the difficult decision, so he was making the arrangements on your behalf." I looked at Daniel, who had gone very still, his face carefully neutral. "Dr. Chun," I said slowly, "there is absolutely no appointment. Bailey is healthy. I never authorized this and I need to know exactly what my son told you. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Harrison, I think we should talk. Your son has actually called our clinic multiple times over the past 3 weeks, providing detailed information about Bailey's supposed deterioration, and insisting that euthanasia was necessary. Some of what he said raised concerns among our staff, which is why I'm calling you directly instead of just sending a confirmation text. What kind of concerns? I asked, watching Daniel's face carefully. He had stood up and was now pacing near the window, his jaw tight. Daniel claimed you were in denial about Bailey's condition, that you were refusing to accept medical advice, and that he had power of attorney to make medical decisions for your animals. He also mentioned that you were in the early stages of dementia and couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions about pet care. The words hit me like a physical blow.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Daniel had been telling people I had dementia? That I couldn't be trusted? That he had authority to make decisions about my animals without my knowledge or consent? Dr. Chun continued, her voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Harrison, I've known you professionally for almost 10 years. When I heard these claims, they didn't match the competent, caring veterinarian I've always respected. That's why I'm calling. If your son is trying to euthanize your healthy dog without your knowledge, you need to know about it. Thank you, I managed to say, my voice shaking. Thank you for calling me directly. After I hung up, I turned to face Daniel. He was still standing by the window, his back to me, his shoulders tense. You scheduled an appointment to kill Bailey? My voice was barely above a whisper. Without my knowledge? Without my permission? You told them I have dementia? Daniel turned around, and I saw something in his face I had never seen before. Cold calculation mixed with frustration, as if I had ruined a carefully laid plan. Mom, you're not thinking clearly about this. Bailey is suffering, and you're too emotionally compromised to see it. As your son and as a veterinarian, I was trying to spare you the pain of making an impossible decision. He's not suffering, Daniel. He's perfectly healthy. You know that. You've examined him yourself. You're proving my point, Daniel said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. You can't be objective about this. That's exactly why I needed to take action. What other actions have you been taking without my knowledge? The question hung in the air between us. Daniel's expression shifted, becoming harder, more defensive. I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying that if you've been lying to veterinarians about my mental health and trying to euthanize my healthy dog without my consent, you might be lying about other things too. Daniel's face flushed with anger. After everything I've done for this family, after all the years I've invested in this practice, you're going to accuse me of lying? You haven't invested years in this practice, Daniel. You've been here for 2 years, and I've paid you a generous salary the entire time. Before that, I supported you through 3 different graduate programs and paid off your student loans. That's what parents are supposed to do, he snapped. You're supposed to support your children. You're supposed to help them succeed. But you've always held your success over my head, haven't you? Always reminding me that this is your practice, your reputation, your achievement. The bitterness in his voice was shocking. I had never realized how much resentment he had been carrying. Daniel, I never meant to make you feel that way. I was proud of you for finally finding a career path. I wanted us to work together. Did you? Or did you want to keep controlling everything while letting me do the grunt work? Daniel's voice was rising now, years of suppressed anger pouring out. I'm 35 years old, Mom. I should have my own practice by now, my own reputation. Instead, I'm working in your shadow, taking orders from your staff, living in your guest house because Melissa and I can't afford our own place on the salary you pay me. I pay you market rate for an associate veterinarian with your experience level. Plus, I've been planning to transfer ownership to you. That's why we're here today. Right, transfer ownership. With you staying on as a consultant, maintaining control, second-guessing every decision I make. Do you know how humiliating it is to have my own mother supervising my work? Before I could respond, Jenny knocked on the door. Dr. Harrison, the Martins are here for their 9 o'clock appointment. And Dr. Harrison, she looked at Daniel uncertainly. Dr. Patterson needs you to look at the radiographs for the Thompson dog. I'll be right there, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jenny, Please reschedule all of Daniel's appointments for today. Cancel mine as well. We need to have a family meeting. After Jenny left, I turned back to Daniel. We're not signing anything today. Not until we sort out what's really going on here. You're being irrational, Daniel said, but I could hear the panic beneath his anger. You're letting one phone call destroy years of planning. One phone call that revealed you've been lying about me to other veterinarians, trying to kill my dog, and apparently harboring massive resentment about our professional relationship. Yes, Daniel, that one phone call changes everything. I need you to leave my office. Now. You can't kick me out. I work here. I can and I am. As of this moment, you're on administrative leave pending an investigation into your conduct. Daniel's face went white, then red with rage. You're going to regret this, Mom. You're going to look back on this moment and realize you threw away your relationship with your only child over a dog. If that's how you see this situation, I replied, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands, then you're not the son I thought I raised. Daniel grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the framed diplomas on the wall. Bailey, who had been watching the entire exchange with his ears back and body tense, immediately moved closer to me and pressed his head against my leg. I sank into my chair and wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his fur as the enormity of what had just happened began to sink in. My son had tried to kill my dog. He had lied to other professionals about my mental health. He had been planning something, though I didn't yet understand what. And I had been about to sign over everything I had worked for to someone who clearly saw me as an obstacle rather than a mother. After a few minutes, I called Linda, my best friend and the practice manager at a competing veterinary hospital across town. Within an hour, she was sitting in my office, listening to the whole story while Bailey rested his head in her lap. Katie, Linda said when I finished, you need to call your attorney. Right now. This isn't just about a euthanasia appointment. This is about someone systematically undermining your reputation and trying to manipulate you into giving up your practice. But why would Daniel do this? Linda looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. Honey, your practice is worth at least $3 million. If Daniel convinced you to retire and transfer ownership, he would have complete control of a very valuable asset. And if you were to die or become incapacitated shortly after the transfer, he would inherit everything without having to wait for you to actually retire. The implication made me feel sick. You think he was planning something worse than killing Bailey? I think Bailey was a test, Linda said bluntly. Daniel was testing whether he could manipulate situations, lie to professionals, and get away with actions taken without your knowledge. If he succeeded with Bailey, what would have stopped him from escalating? I spent the rest of that day making phone calls. First to my attorney, Patricia Morrison, who immediately advised me not to sign any ownership transfer documents and to document everything that had happened. Then to Dr. Chun at the emergency clinic, asking her to provide written documentation of all communications with Daniel. Then to my accountant, requesting a complete audit of the practice's finances for the past 2 years. What Patricia said during our call stayed with me. Katie, she said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it seriously. Have you noticed any changes in your health over the past few months? Any unexplained symptoms, unusual fatigue, or cognitive issues? Now that she mentioned it, I had been feeling more tired than usual, occasionally dizzy, and struggling with focus in ways I had attributed to stress and aging. Why do you ask? Because Daniel telling people you have dementia suggests he might have been trying to create a narrative. If you had started showing symptoms that seemed to support that narrative, it would have been easier for him to convince people he needed to make decisions on your behalf. You think he might have been doing something to make me sick? I think we can't rule anything out. I want you to go to your doctor immediately and get a complete blood panel. Tell them about your symptoms and about what's happened with Daniel. If something shows up in your tests, we'll know this goes beyond just the Bailey situation. That evening, I sat in my cottage with Bailey beside me and a glass of wine I was afraid to drink, suddenly uncertain about everything in my life. I called Daniel's phone, but he didn't answer. I tried Melissa, his wife, but she claimed she knew nothing about the euthanasia appointment and said Daniel had gone to stay with a friend because he was upset about our argument. I didn't believe her. The next morning, I went to see my physician, Dr. Rachel Foster, and explained everything that had happened. She ordered comprehensive blood work, including tests for heavy metals, toxins, and unusual substances that might explain my symptoms. The tests would take a few days, but Dr. Foster was clearly concerned. "Katie," she said as I was leaving, "in 30 years of practice, I've seen family members try to have their relatives declared incompetent for financial reasons. It's more common than people think. If your symptoms are being caused by something external, we need to know immediately. I also need you to document everything. Keep a journal of your symptoms, what you eat and drink, who has access to your food and medications. Treat this like the investigation it needs to be." When I returned to the clinic, I found the staff in an uproar. Daniel had sent an email to everyone claiming that I was experiencing a mental health crisis, and that he was temporarily taking over management of the practice for everyone's safety. He had also changed several passwords for our computer systems, and contacted our pharmaceutical suppliers claiming there had been changes in authorization. I called an emergency staff meeting and explained the situation as clearly as I could without going into all the personal details. "Daniel is no longer employed at this practice," I told the assembled team. "Any communications from him should be forwarded to me immediately. If he shows up here, please call me or call the police if you feel unsafe." "Dr. Harrison," Jenny asked hesitantly, "is Bailey okay?" I heard some concerning things. "Bailey is perfectly healthy," I assured her. "And that's part of the problem. Daniel scheduled a euthanasia appointment for him without my knowledge, claiming Bailey was suffering when he's not. That appointment was the catalyst for discovering that Daniel has been lying to people about my health and my mental state." The shock on their faces was visible. The staff had known Bailey for 3 years. They had seen him playing in the clinic, interacting with clients, showing no signs of illness or pain. Over the next few days, my investigation into Daniel's activities revealed a disturbing pattern. My accountant discovered that $150,000 had been transferred from the practice's operating accounts to a personal account in Daniel's name over the past 18 months. The transfers had been small enough to avoid triggering alerts, disguised as legitimate business expenses. Dr. Chun provided documentation showing that Daniel had called her clinic 5 times over 3 weeks, each time providing more dramatic descriptions of Bailey's supposed suffering and my supposed cognitive decline. My attorney discovered that Daniel had filed paperwork attempting to establish a conservatorship over my affairs, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my own finances or making medical decisions. That petition had been scheduled for a hearing in 2 weeks, conveniently timed to occur right after I would have signed over the practice to him. The blood test results came back showing elevated levels of a sedative medication I didn't take. Dr. Foster called me immediately. "Katie, someone has been drugging you. The levels in your system are consistent with regular, deliberate dosing over an extended period. This medication would cause exactly the symptoms you've been experiencing: fatigue, dizziness, difficulty concentrating, memory problems." I felt the room tilt around me. How would someone be giving me this medication? It could be added to food or drink. Do you prepare all your own meals? Has anyone else had regular access to what you eat or drink? I thought about the past several months. Daniel and Melissa had been coming to dinner twice a week. Melissa often brought coffee from a fancy shop downtown, insisting it was a treat since I worked such long hours. Daniel had started keeping energy drinks in my refrigerator at the clinic, claiming they would help me stay sharp during long surgical days. "Oh my God," I whispered. "My own son has been poisoning me." Dr. Foster's voice was gentle but firm. "We need to report this to the police immediately. This isn't just about financial manipulation anymore. This is attempted harm, possibly attempted murder if the doses had been increased. We also need to get you medical treatment to clear this medication from your system and prevent any long-term effects." The police investigation moved quickly once Dr. Foster provided the medical evidence. Detective James Wilson was assigned to the case, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and the weary expression of someone who had seen too much human cruelty. "Mrs. Harrison," he said when we met at the police station, "I need you to understand that cases like this are more common than most people realize. Adult children trying to incapacitate their parents to gain control of assets, to isolate them, sometimes to hasten their death for inheritance. It's financial elder abuse, and it's a serious crime." Daniel was arrested 3 days later as he tried to board a flight to Mexico. Melissa was arrested simultaneously at their apartment, where police found additional quantities of the sedative medication, detailed financial documents showing their planning, and a journal where Melissa had recorded the doses she had been giving me. The journal was chilling in its clinical detail. September 3rd. Gave Kay 50 milligrams in morning coffee. Seemed more tired than usual by afternoon. September 10th. Increased to 75 milligrams. Kay complained of dizziness during surgery. Perfect. September 17th. Kay mentioned to staff that she's been feeling off lately. Planted suggestion that she should consider reducing her workload. The entries went on for months, documenting a systematic campaign to incapacitate me while creating a narrative of declining mental function. What made it worse was discovering the larger plan. Daniel and Melissa had taken out a life insurance policy on me without my knowledge, forging my signature on the application. They had been planning to have me declared incompetent, transfer the practice to Daniel, increase the medication doses until I either died or became permanently incapacitated, and then collect both the insurance money and the value of the practice. Bailey had been an obstacle to this plan because he was protective of me and might have alerted others if something happened. Daniel's attempt to euthanize him had been about removing that protection, not about any concern for Bailey's well-being. The trial took place 6 months later. I sat in the courtroom watching my son and his wife face charges of elder abuse, fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. The prosecution presented the evidence methodically. The blood tests showing deliberate drugging, Melissa's journal documenting the poisoning, the financial transfers, the forged conservatorship papers, the fraudulent life insurance policy, and Dr. Chen's testimony about Daniel's attempts to euthanize Bailey. Daniel's attorney tried to argue that he had been genuinely concerned about my well-being, that the medication in my system must have gotten there some other way, that the financial transfers were legitimate business expenses. But Melissa's journal destroyed any possibility of that defense being credible. She had documented everything in her own handwriting, creating a roadmap of their crime that no defense attorney could explain away. The hardest part of the trial was listening to Daniel testify. He claimed that I had always been controlling and manipulative, that I had trapped him in a career he didn't want, that I had held my financial support over his head to keep him dependent. He portrayed himself as a victim of my supposed emotional abuse, driven to desperate measures by years of maternal manipulation. It was painful to hear my attempts to help and support him reframed as abuse. But it was also clarifying. This was who Daniel really was. Someone who saw kindness as weakness, generosity as obligation, and love as a tool for manipulation. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Daniel was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Melissa received 20 years. As they were led away in handcuffs, Daniel finally looked at me directly. "I hate you," he said, his voice cold and empty. "I've always hated you. It should have broken my heart." Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. The son I had loved no longer existed, if he ever had. The person being taken to prison was a stranger wearing my son's face. After the trial, I threw myself into rebuilding my life and my practice. The staff who had stood by me during the investigation became my chosen family. Linda helped me restructure the business and implement better financial controls. Patricia helped me update my will to ensure that if anything happened to me, the practice would go to my staff collectively rather than any family member. But the most important change was internal. I stopped feeling guilty about my success. I stopped apologizing for building something valuable. I stopped trying to help people who saw my generosity as an opportunity for exploitation. Bailey lived for 5 more wonderful years after Daniel's conviction. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at 13 years old, I grieved deeply but also felt grateful. He had saved my life by being healthy when Daniel claimed he was suffering. If Bailey had actually been sick, if there had been any legitimate reason to question his quality of life, Daniel's plan might have succeeded. I adopted 2 more dogs after Bailey's death, naming them Justice and Grace. They remind me every day that love and loyalty still exist in the world, that trust is possible even after betrayal, and that family is defined by choice and character rather than blood. I also started a foundation to help elderly pet owners protect themselves from financial exploitation by family members. I learned that my experience wasn't unique. Adult children trying to isolate their parents from their pets, as a way of gaining control, is a surprisingly common tactic in elder abuse cases. Pets provide companionship, purpose, and protection. They notice when something is wrong. They alert others when their owners are in distress. For abusers, pets are obstacles to be removed. The foundation provides legal services, emergency boarding for pets whose owners are being pressured to surrender them, and education about the warning signs of financial elder abuse. We've helped hundreds of elderly people maintain their independence and their beloved animals. Every person we help feels like justice for what Daniel tried to do to Bailey and me. Now at 68, I still run my practice, though I've promoted 2 excellent veterinarians to partnership positions and reduced my own schedule. I mentor young veterinarians, volunteer at animal shelters, and spend my free time with Justice and Grace hiking the beautiful mountains around Asheville. I never remarried and I never had more children, but I built a life rich with purpose, genuine relationships, and the satisfaction of work I love. Sometimes people ask if I ever hear from Daniel. He writes letters occasionally, always claiming innocence, always blaming me for his imprisonment. I stopped reading them years ago. There's no point in engaging with someone who sees themselves as perpetually victimized by everyone else's choices. The real lesson I learned from that terrible September morning, when Dr. Chun called me about Bailey, wasn't about betrayal or family dysfunction or financial exploitation. It was about trust. Not the naive trust one had given Daniel because he was my son, but the earned trust one built with people like Linda and Dr. Chan and Detective Wilson. People who showed through their actions, not their words, that they valued honesty and integrity. Bailey trusted his instincts about Daniel long before I did. That's why Daniel wanted him gone. Dogs can't be manipulated by smooth words or guilt trips or claims of family obligation. They respond to what people actually are, not what they pretend to be. If I had listened to Bailey's wariness around Daniel, if I had paid attention to my dog's judgment instead of dismissing it, I might have seen the truth sooner. These days I pay attention to what my dogs tell me about people. Justice and Grace are excellent judges of character, and I trust their instincts completely. They've helped me identify several potential employees who seemed perfect on paper but made the dogs uncomfortable. Every time I listened to the dogs instead of the resume, I later discovered reasons to be glad I did. I'm grateful for many things. For Dr. Chen's willingness to call me directly instead of just going along with Daniel's instructions, for Linda's immediate support and practical advice, for my own stubbornness in refusing to drink that wine the night I suspected something was wrong, for the medical technology that could identify the drugs in my system. But most of all, I'm grateful for Bailey, a shelter dog with a difficult past who became my companion, my protector, and ultimately my savior. He was supposed to be the lucky one, rescued from a cage and given a loving home. But I was the one who got rescued. Every day by his presence and his love. Daniel tried to kill Bailey because he represented everything Daniel couldn't manipulate. Unconditional love, genuine loyalty, and the kind of trust that has to be earned rather than demanded. Bailey's health and happiness exposed Daniel's lies. His very existence was proof that I wasn't the declining, confused woman Daniel claimed I was. That's why Daniel had to eliminate him before moving forward with his larger plan. But Daniel underestimated the power of that relationship. He thought Bailey was just a pet, easily disposed of, insignificant compared to the fortune he stood to gain. He didn't understand that Bailey was family in the truest sense, and that trying to harm him would trigger the same protective instincts in me that any mother feels when someone threatens her child. The irony isn't lost on me. Daniel, my biological son, saw me as an ATM and an obstacle. Bailey, a dog I adopted from a shelter, saw me as someone worth protecting with his very presence. Biology didn't determine who really loved me. Choice did. Character did. 7 years have passed since that September morning. I'm still here, still practicing veterinary medicine, still healing animals and comforting their owners. Daniel is still in prison and will be for many years to come. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Dr. Chan hadn't called me that morning. If she had simply gone along with Daniel's appointment, if Bailey had been euthanized before I knew what was happening, would I have signed those ownership papers in my grief? Would Daniel have continued drugging me until I became completely incapacitated? Would I even be alive today? I'll never know the answer to those questions, and I'm grateful for that uncertainty. What I do know is that one phone call, one moment of a stranger choosing to verify information instead of blindly accepting it, saved both my life and Bailey's. Dr. Chen's small act of professional integrity stopped a murder plot, and exposed a systematic campaign of abuse. That's the other lesson I carry with me. Never underestimate the power of doing the right thing, even when it's inconvenient, even when it means questioning authority, even when it would be easier to just follow instructions. Dr. Chun didn't have to call me. She could have processed the appointment, euthanized Bailey, and never known she had participated in something terrible. But she trusted her instincts, questioned information that didn't make sense, and made a choice that changed everything. Now I try to be that person for others. When something doesn't make sense, I ask questions. When someone's story doesn't match their actions, I investigate. When my instincts tell me something is wrong, I listen. Because sometimes one phone call, one question, one moment of choosing integrity over convenience can save a life. Bailey taught me that love doesn't require blood relations. Dr. Chun taught me that strangers can be heroes. Daniel taught me that family ties don't guarantee loyalty or love. And together, they taught me that the life I build going forward matters more than the family I was born into. So here I am at 68, healthy and happy, surrounded by people and animals who chose to be in my life, rather than feeling obligated to be here. It's not the life I planned when I was young, and believed that family meant unconditional love and support. But it's a better life than I could have imagined, built on truth and earned trust, rather than biological connections and assumed loyalty. And every morning when justice and grace wake me up with wet noses and wagging tails, demanding breakfast and walks and attention, I remember that this is what love looks like. Not the manipulative concern Daniel showed while poisoning me, but the genuine devotion of creatures who ask for nothing except the chance to be part of my life. That's worth more than any inheritance, any business, any amount of money. That's the real treasure Daniel tried to steal and failed to recognize even when it was right in front of him. The capacity to love and be loved, honestly and completely, without manipulation or ulterior motives. I have that now and I protect it fiercely. Not with legal documents or financial controls, though those have their place, but with attention, integrity, and the wisdom to recognize that family is defined by actions rather than words, by choice rather than obligation, by love rather than law. Bailey understood that instinctively. It took me 61 years and a near-death experience to learn the same lesson. But I learned it, and I'm grateful for that education, painful as it was. Now when people tell me their stories of family betrayal, financial exploitation, or beloved pets threatened by relatives who see them as obstacles, I listen with understanding rather than shock. I know how it feels to discover that someone you trusted completely has been plotting against you. I know the disorientation of having your reality questioned by people who claim to love you. I know the fear of realizing you've been systematically poisoned by your own child. But I also know something else. You can survive it, rebuild from it, and create something better from the ashes of what was destroyed. You can find new family, build new trust, and discover that love still exists even after betrayal. You can learn to pay attention to the warnings that animals and intuition provide. You can choose to help others avoid what you endured. And you can look back on the moment when everything fell apart and recognize it not as an ending, but as the painful beginning of something truer and more valuable than what you lost. That September morning when my phone rang and Dr. Chan told me about the euthanasia appointment Daniel had scheduled, I thought my world was ending. In a way it was. But it was also the moment when a better world began. A world where I stopped trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. A world where I learned to recognize genuine loyalty when I found it. A world where I understood that the greatest betrayal can lead to the most profound liberation. Bailey didn't just give me 7 years of companionship. He gave me a second chance at life and the wisdom to build that life on solid ground, rather than the shifting sand of obligation and guilt. For that gift I will be grateful for as long as I live. The months following Daniel's arrest were a strange mixture of relief and grief. I had survived something that should have destroyed me, but the cost of that survival was the complete dissolution of the family I thought I had. Every morning I woke up and had to remember all over again that my son had tried to kill me, that the man I had raised and loved and supported through every failure and fresh start had seen me as nothing more than an obstacle to his financial goals. The practice became my sanctuary during those difficult months. Returning to work meant returning to purpose, to the clear moral universe of veterinary medicine where suffering could be alleviated and love between humans and animals was uncomplicated and genuine. My staff had rallied around me in ways that made me understand what real loyalty looked like, what it meant to have people choose to support you not because they were obligated by blood but because they valued you as a person and colleague. Ginny, my receptionist who had worked with me for 8 years, started arriving early every morning to make sure I had coffee ready when I came in. Not coffee from outside sources that might be tampered with, but coffee she brewed herself in the office kitchen using beans she purchased and prepared. She never made a big deal about it, never drew attention to what she was doing, but I understood the message. She was protecting me in the small ways she could, making sure I had something safe to drink in a world where I had learned that even my son's gifts might be poisoned. Marcus Chun, one of the veterinarians who had joined the practice 3 years earlier, took over many of Daniel's cases and clients without complaint. He was a quiet man in his early 40s who had emigrated from Taiwan and built his career through pure skill and dedication. He never asked me invasive questions about what had happened, never pressed me to talk about my feelings or process my trauma on his timeline. But he made a point of checking in with me several times a day, asking if I needed anything, offering to take on surgical cases if I seemed tired or overwhelmed. Sarah Kim, our lead veterinary technician, appointed herself as my unofficial bodyguard. She was a fierce woman in her 30s with a black belt in Taekwondo, and a protective streak that extended to everyone she considered part of her pack. After Daniel's arrest, Sarah made sure I was never alone in the parking lot, always walking me to my car at the end of the day, and waiting until I drove away before returning to the building. When a reporter tried to ambush me outside the clinic looking for comments about the case, Sarah physically positioned herself between us and informed the reporter in language that was polite but unmistakably threatening that if he didn't leave immediately, she would be happy to demonstrate several techniques for removing unwanted people from the premises. The reporter left. These small acts of protection and care from my staff meant more to me than they probably realized. In a world where my own son had betrayed me so completely, they were showing me that chosen family could be stronger and more reliable than biological connections. They owed me nothing beyond professional courtesy, yet they gave me loyalty and compassion without expecting anything in return. Linda remained my closest confidant through everything. We had been friends since veterinary school, had supported each other through divorces and career challenges, and the death of her husband 5 years earlier. She understood grief and betrayal in ways that made her the perfect person to talk to when the weight of everything became too much. We started meeting for dinner every Thursday evening, a standing date that became a ritual of normalcy in a life that felt anything but normal. "Katie," she said one evening about 2 months after Daniel's arrest, "I need you to hear something that might be hard to accept. You didn't fail as a mother." I had been waiting for someone to say that, hoping someone would absolve me of the guilt that gnawed at me every time I thought about Daniel. But hearing the words didn't bring the relief I expected. "How can you say that? I raised him. Whatever went wrong in his character, whatever made him capable of trying to murder me, that came from somewhere." Linda shook her head firmly. "Some people are born with something broken inside them. No amount of good parenting can fix a fundamental lack of empathy or conscience. You gave Daniel every opportunity, every advantage, every bit of love and support a parent could give. What he did with those gifts was his choice, not your failure. But I must have missed signs. I must have seen evidence of what he was and refused to acknowledge it." "You saw what he wanted you to see," Linda replied. "Sociopaths are experts at manipulation. They learn early how to mirror the emotions they don't actually feel, how to say what people want to hear, how to create the illusion of caring while using people for their own ends. Daniel fooled everyone, not just you. He fooled Melissa into marrying him and helping with his schemes. He fooled your staff into thinking he was a competent veterinarian who genuinely cared about animals. He fooled Dr. Chun initially when he called about Bailey. You're not uniquely gullible or blind. You're a normal person who trusted someone who seemed trustworthy." That's what Linda helped me understand over many Thursday dinners and countless phone conversations. The difference between reasonable trust and naive blindness, between being a supportive parent and being an enabler, between taking responsibility for your own choices and taking responsibility for someone else's evil. It was Linda who encouraged me to start therapy, who found me a psychologist named Dr. Amanda Torres who specialized in family trauma and elder abuse. Dr. Torres's office was in a converted house in downtown Asheville, decorated in soothing blues and greens with comfortable furniture that invited honesty rather than demanding it. Our first session was difficult because I had spent my entire life being the helper, the healer, the person who took care of others. Admitting that I needed help, that I was struggling to process what had happened, felt like weakness. Catherine, Dr. Torres said during that first meeting, "You've experienced a profound betrayal by someone you loved and trusted completely. That kind of trauma doesn't heal quickly or easily. The fact that you're here, willing to do the work of processing and healing, isn't weakness. It's courage." Over the following months, Dr. Torres helped me understand the psychological dynamics of what Daniel had done. She explained how adult children who engage in elder abuse often dehumanize their parents, viewing them as resources to be exploited, rather than people to be loved. She walked me through the grooming process Daniel had used, slowly conditioning me to doubt my own judgment while positioning himself as the responsible, caring son who was trying to help his declining mother. We talked about the drugging at length, about how insidious it was to have my own perceptions altered by chemicals introduced into my body without my knowledge or consent. That violation of my autonomy, my body, my mind was in some ways harder to process than the financial theft or even the attempt to kill Bailey. Daniel hadn't just tried to take my money or harm someone I loved. He had tried to reshape my reality itself, to make me question my own competence and sanity. That's one of the cruelest aspects of this kind of abuse, Dr. Torres explained. When someone drugs you to create symptoms that support their narrative about your declining mental health, they're not just harming your body. They're attacking your sense of self, your confidence in your own perceptions. That psychological violation can be even more damaging than physical harm, because it undermines your ability to trust your own mind. We also talked about Bailey and the role he had played in saving my life. Dr. Torres helped me understand that my bond with Bailey had been genuine and important, not a substitute for human relationships as Daniel had implied when he called me pathetically attached to a dog. The love between humans and animals serves a real purpose, she explained. It provides companionship without the complex power dynamics that can complicate human relationships. Bailey loved you for who you were, not for what you could give him. That kind of uncomplicated devotion has real value. The therapy helped, but the real healing came from rebuilding my life on a foundation of truth, rather than the lies I had been living with. I started by being completely honest with myself about Daniel. Not the son I had wanted him to be, not the person I had hoped he would become, but the reality of who he actually was. A manipulator. A thief. Someone fundamentally incapable of genuine love or empathy. Someone who had never really been the person I thought I knew. Accepting that reality was like accepting a death, because in a very real sense the Daniel I had loved had never existed. He had been a character my son performed, a role he played to get what he wanted from me. The real Daniel was the person who sat in Melissa's apartment calculating doses of sedatives, who called veterinary clinics lying about his mother's dementia, who scheduled the euthanasia of a healthy dog because that dog represented an obstacle to murder and theft. That Daniel was a stranger, and mourning him meant mourning someone who had never been real. I also had to reckon with my own role in creating the conditions that allowed Daniel's abuse to continue for so long. Not because I had failed as a mother, as Linda had correctly pointed out, but because I had prioritized avoiding conflict over addressing problems. Every time Daniel had shown irresponsibility or lack of empathy in his younger years, I had made excuses. When he abandoned his first graduate program after one semester, I told myself he was just finding his path. When he maxed out credit cards I had given him for emergencies and then expected me to pay them off, I told myself he was young and still learning financial responsibility. When he showed little genuine interest in the animals we treated, focusing instead on the business aspects of veterinary medicine, I told myself he had a different but equally valid approach to the profession. Looking back with the clarity that trauma and therapy provided, I could see the pattern. Daniel had always been primarily interested in what he could get from situations and people. He had chosen veterinary medicine not because he loved animals or wanted to heal them, but because he saw it as a lucrative career and a path to inheriting my practice. His relationships had always been transactional, though I had refused to see it that way. Even as a child, Daniel's affection had been conditional on getting what he wanted. But I had been so desperate to maintain the illusion of a loving family after my divorce that I had interpreted manipulation as love, compliance as genuine connection. Dr. Torres helped me see that this pattern wasn't unusual. Many parents, she explained, especially those who have experienced the dissolution of their own marriages, invest enormous emotional energy into relationships with their children. They need those relationships to work, need to believe in the family bond, and that need can create blind spots. You weren't stupid or willfully ignorant, Catherine. You were human. You wanted to believe in your son's goodness because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. The criminal case against Daniel and Melissa moved forward with the methodical pace of the justice system. Patricia Morrison, my attorney, kept me informed of every development, while shielding me from having to be directly involved in proceedings whenever possible. The prosecution was being handled by Assistant District Attorney James Crawford, a man in his 50s with silver hair, and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many families destroyed by greed. Mr. Crawford came to my house one evening about 3 months after Daniel's arrest to prepare me for the trial. He brought thick folders of evidence and a digital recorder, settling into my living room with the kind of weary professionalism that suggested this was far from his first case of family betrayal. Mrs. Harrison, he began, I want you to understand what we're dealing with here. Your son and his wife have hired very expensive defense attorneys. They're going to argue that the drugging was Melissa's idea, that Daniel was manipulated by his wife, that he genuinely believed you were experiencing cognitive decline and was trying to help. They're going to paint him as a concerned son who made some bad decisions but had no intent to harm you. Can they really make that argument when Melissa's journal documents everything they did? I asked. They can try, Mr. Crawford replied. Defense attorneys don't need to prove their clients are innocent. They just need to create reasonable doubt. They'll argue that Melissa's journal entries were exaggerated, that she was the mastermind and Daniel was a passive participant, that the euthanasia appointment for Bailey was made out of genuine concern for the dog's well-being even if the concern was misplaced. The way they'll attack you will be particularly difficult. What do you mean? They're going to argue that you were actually experiencing cognitive decline, that the medication in your system could have come from contamination or accidental ingestion, that your relationship with Daniel was troubled, and you're now seeking revenge for perceived slights. They'll bring in witnesses to testify about times you seemed forgetful or confused. They'll present the ownership transfer documents as evidence that you were planning to retire, because you recognized your own declining abilities. They'll try to make the jury see Daniel as a devoted son dealing with a difficult parent who has now turned on him. The thought of having my own struggles during the drugging used as evidence that I was genuinely incompetent made me feel sick. But I knew Mr. Crawford was preparing me for reality, not trying to discourage me. What do we do to counter that? We tell the truth, he said simply. We present the medical evidence showing that your symptoms were caused by deliberate drugging, not natural cognitive decline. We bring in character witnesses who can testify to your competence before the drugging began. We show the jury Melissa's journal entries, and her own words documenting their systematic plan. We present the financial evidence showing $150,000 stolen from your practice. We have Dr. Chun testify about Daniel's lies regarding Bailey. And we put you on the stand to tell your story in your own words. The thought of testifying terrified me, but I knew it was necessary. My story was the heart of this case, the human reality behind all the medical reports and financial documents and legal charges. If I couldn't face Daniel in court and tell the truth about what he had done, the jury might be swayed by the defense's portrayal of him as a concerned son dealing with an irrational mother. Over the following weeks, I met with Mr. Crawford multiple times to prepare for testimony. He coached me on how to answer questions clearly and directly, how to maintain composure when defense attorneys tried to rattle me, how to focus on facts rather than emotions even though this was the most emotional experience of my life. He also warned me about what to expect from Daniel and Melissa. They're going to look different in court, he explained. They'll be dressed conservatively, they'll appear remorseful and sympathetic, they'll probably cry when certain evidence is presented. Don't let their performance shake you. These are people who systematically drugged you for months while planning to kill your dog and possibly you. Their courtroom demeanor is just another manipulation. The trial was scheduled for January, giving me several months to prepare mentally and emotionally for what was coming. During that time, I focused on rebuilding my practice and my health. The sedatives had been cleared from my system within a few weeks, but the psychological effects of having my perceptions altered took longer to overcome. I found myself questioning my own judgments, wondering if I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing, doubting my memories and interpretations of events. Dr. Torres helped me work through these doubts by having me document everything in writing. Keep a journal, she suggested. Write down what happens each day, what you observe, what you think and feel. When you doubt yourself later, you can go back and read what you wrote in real time. That practice of documentation became an anchor for me. Every evening I would sit down with Justice and Grace beside me and write about my day. What cases I had treated, what interactions I had with staff, what I had eaten and drunk, and who had access to my food. The writing helped me trust my own perceptions again, helped me rebuild confidence in my ability to observe and interpret reality accurately. It also created a record that would be valuable if anyone ever tried to question my mental competence again. I also made changes to my practice that would prevent anyone from exploiting it the way Daniel had. I hired a professional practice manager who had no family connections to me, someone whose job was to monitor finances and flag any irregularities. I implemented new procedures requiring 2 signatures on any significant financial transactions. I updated my partnership agreements to ensure that no single person could take control of the practice without approval from multiple partners. And I removed my personal funds from any accounts that Daniel had ever had access to, opening new accounts at a different bank with new security protocols. These practical steps helped me feel less vulnerable, less like the naive woman who had trusted too easily and paid such a high price for that trust. But they also represented a loss of innocence, a recognition that the world contained people who would exploit trust and kindness for personal gain. I hated that I had to protect myself so carefully from future betrayal, but I accepted it as the cost of survival in a world where even your own child might see you as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved. The other significant change I made was expanding my circle of support. I had always been somewhat isolated, throwing myself into work and focusing on Daniel to the exclusion of developing deep friendships or community connections. After the trial preparation began, I made a conscious effort to change that pattern. I joined a book club that met monthly at a local bookstore. I started attending a weekly yoga class at a studio near my house. I volunteered at the animal shelter where I had adopted Bailey, helping to evaluate dogs and match them with appropriate adopters. Each of these activities brought new people into my life, people who knew me only as Catherine the veterinarian or Catherine the book lover or Catherine the volunteer, not as Catherine the woman whose son tried to kill her. Those relationships, casual and uncomplicated, helped me remember that I was more than my trauma, more than what had been done to me. Linda watched these changes with approval. "You're building a real life," she told me one Thursday over dinner. "Not the performance of a life you thought you were supposed to have, but an authentic life based on your actual interests and values. I think this is the first time I've seen you prioritize your own well-being over what you thought you should be doing." She was right. For decades I had shaped my life around obligations and expectations. I had stayed in an unhappy marriage longer than I should have because I thought that's what mothers were supposed to do for their children. I had supported Daniel through endless failures and fresh starts because I thought that's what good mothers did. I had worked exhausting hours and sacrificed my own health and happiness because I thought that's what dedicated veterinarians did. But all of that performing of expected roles had left me vulnerable to someone who saw my sense of obligation as a weakness to exploit. Now I was learning to build a life based on what I actually wanted and needed, what brought me genuine joy and satisfaction, what aligned with my real values rather than my ideas about who I was supposed to be. And surprisingly, that authentic life was fuller and richer than the performed life had ever been. The trial began on a cold January morning with snow threatening in the heavy gray clouds that hung over the courthouse. I arrived early with Linda and Patricia Morrison, my hands shaking despite the sedative Dr. Torres had prescribed to help me manage my anxiety. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lights that cast everything in harsh shadow. Daniel and Melissa were already seated at the defense table with their attorneys. This was the first time I had seen them since Daniel's arrest 4 months earlier, and the change in their appearance was striking. Daniel had lost weight, his face gaunt and pale from months in jail. He was dressed in a conservative suit that made him look younger and more vulnerable than I remembered. Melissa sat beside him in a modest navy dress, her blonde hair pulled back simply, wearing minimal makeup. They looked like respectable young professionals who had somehow gotten caught up in a terrible misunderstanding, not like people who had systematically poisoned an elderly woman and stolen $150,000 from her business. The jury selection took 2 days, during which I sat in the back of the courtroom watching potential jurors being questioned about their ability to be impartial, their experiences with elderly family members, their attitudes toward elder abuse. It was strange to hear my life discussed in such clinical terms, to watch strangers evaluate whether they could fairly judge the people who had tried to destroy me. When the actual trial began, Mr. Crawford's opening statement was clear and direct. "This is a case about greed and betrayal," he told the jury. Catherine Harrison spent 30 years building a successful veterinary practice worth millions of dollars. Her son Daniel and his wife Melissa decided they didn't want to wait for their inheritance. They devised a plan to make Catherine appear mentally incompetent, steal her business, and potentially end her life to collect life insurance money. They drugged her with sedatives to create symptoms of cognitive decline. They stole $150,000 from her practice. They attempted to have her declared incompetent through fraudulent court filings. And when her dog Bailey proved to be an obstacle to their plans, they tried to have him euthanized under false pretenses. This case is about what happens when love and trust are weaponized by people who lack conscience or empathy. The defense's opening statement painted a very different picture. Daniel Harrison is a devoted son who became increasingly concerned about his mother's health and judgment, his attorney argued. He made some questionable decisions while trying to help her, but his actions came from a place of love and worry, not malice. The prosecution will present evidence of drugging, but that evidence is circumstantial and can be explained by accidental contamination. They'll present evidence of financial transfers, but those were legitimate business expenses. They'll present evidence of attempted euthanasia, but that was based on genuine concern for a dog's well-being. This case is about a family conflict being criminalized because a mother couldn't accept that her son saw problems she refused to acknowledge. The contrast between these two narratives, the prosecution's story of calculated evil versus the defense's story of misguided concern, would define everything that followed. The prosecution's case unfolded over 10 days, witness by witness, piece of evidence by piece of evidence. Dr. Rachel Foster testified about my symptoms and the blood test that revealed sedative medication in my system. She explained that the levels were consistent with regular dosing over an extended period, that the medication could not have gotten into my system through accidental contamination or environmental exposure, that someone had deliberately and repeatedly drugged me. The defense attorney cross-examined her aggressively, suggesting that I might have been taking the medication voluntarily and lying about it, that the tests could have been contaminated, that Dr. Foster's interpretation of the results was speculative rather than definitive. But Dr. Foster held firm, calmly explaining the science behind her conclusions and refusing to be intimidated or confused by hostile questioning. My accountant testified about the $150,000 transferred from practice accounts to Daniel's personal account over 18 months. He walked the jury through each transaction, showing how they had been disguised as legitimate expenses, but were actually redirected to Daniel's benefit. He presented evidence of forged signatures on authorization forms and backdated invoices for services never rendered. The defense argued that Daniel had authorization to make those transfers, that they were related to legitimate practice expenses, that the accountant was making assumptions about fraud based on incomplete information. But when my accountant produced emails showing Daniel had created false vendor accounts and fabricated invoices, the defense's explanations became less credible. Dr. Margaret Chen's testimony was particularly powerful. She described Daniel's multiple phone calls demanding that Bailey be euthanized, his claims that I had dementia and couldn't be trusted to make decisions about my own dog, his insistence that he had legal authority to authorize the procedure without my knowledge. She testified about her decision to call me directly because Daniel's claims didn't match her professional knowledge of me as a competent, caring veterinarian. The jury was attentive throughout her testimony, several members taking notes, one woman nodding as Dr. Chen described her reasoning for questioning Daniel's story. When the defense attorney suggested that Dr. Chen had interfered in a family's private medical decision, she responded calmly but firmly that veterinarians have an ethical obligation to ensure informed consent from the actual owner before euthanizing a healthy animal. Then came Melissa's journal. Mr. Crawford presented enlarged photographs of selected pages, projecting them on a screen so the jury could see Melissa's handwriting, documenting the drugging campaign. September 3rd. Gave K 50 milligrams in morning coffee. Seemed more tired than usual by afternoon. September 10th. Increased to 75 milligrams. Kay complained of dizziness during surgery. Perfect. September 17th. Kay mentioned to staff that she's been feeling off lately. Planted suggestion that she should consider reducing her workload. The clinical detachment in Melissa's writing, the way she referred to me as Kay rather than by name, the satisfaction evident in words like perfect when my symptoms worsened, all of it created a chilling portrait of systematic abuse documented by one of the perpetrators. The defense tried to argue that the journal could have been fabricated, that the handwriting analysis wasn't definitive, that even if Melissa had written those entries they represented her personal delusions rather than actual events. But the prosecution had dozens of pages of documentation, all in Melissa's distinctive handwriting, all corroborating the medical evidence and timeline of my symptoms. Detective James Wilson testified about the investigation, the evidence found in Daniel and Melissa's apartment, the fraudulent life insurance policy with my forged signature, the conservatorship papers Daniel had filed claiming I was incompetent to manage my own affairs. He described interviewing neighbors who reported that Daniel and Melissa had talked openly about inheriting my practice soon, that they had been shopping for expensive cars and looking at houses they couldn't afford on their current income, that they had seemed confident about coming into significant money in the near future. When it was finally my turn to testify, I was terrified but also strangely calm. This was my chance to tell the truth, to make the jury understand what Daniel and Melissa had done not just to my body and my finances, but to my sense of self, my ability to trust, my faith in the possibility of genuine family love. Mr. Crawford took me through my story chronologically. Building the practice over 30 years, surviving my divorce, welcoming Daniel into the practice after he completed his veterinary degree, the months of increasing fatigue and confusion, the morning when Dr. Chan called about Bailey, the discovery of drugging and financial theft. I spoke clearly and directly, focusing on facts while allowing the emotional truth to show through. I described what it felt like to discover your own son had been poisoning you, to realize that months of declining health were not natural aging but deliberate harm, to understand that someone you loved and trusted had been systematically destroying your life while pretending to care. When Mr. Crawford asked me about Bailey, I couldn't keep the emotion entirely out of my voice. He was my companion, I said. My friend. The one presence in my life who loved me without agenda or calculation. When I learned that Daniel had tried to have him killed, it felt like the ultimate violation. Not just because Bailey was important to me, but because Daniel knew how important he was and saw that love as something to be eliminated rather than respected. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal. He suggested I was exaggerating my symptoms to make Daniel look worse. He implied that I had been taking sedatives voluntarily, and was now lying to punish my son for trying to take over the practice. He brought up every mistake I had made in my relationship with Daniel, every time I had been critical or demanding, every instance where I might have made him feel inadequate or controlled. He painted a picture of me as a domineering mother who had crushed her son's independence, and was now seeking revenge because he had tried to build his own life. It was painful to sit there and listen to my love and support for Daniel reframed as abuse and control. But I had prepared for this with Mr. Crawford and Dr. Torres. I answered each question honestly and directly. Yes, I had expected Daniel to work hard in the practice. Yes, I had been disappointed by his earlier career failures. Yes, I had maintained ultimate authority over business decisions because it was my practice and I had built it. But none of that justified drugging me, stealing from me, trying to kill my dog, or attempting to have me declared incompetent so he could take control of my assets. The jury's faces were difficult to read during my testimony. Some seemed sympathetic, others skeptical, several utterly neutral. I had no idea if they believed me or if the defense had succeeded in creating enough doubt about my credibility to undermine the medical and documentary evidence. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand after 3 hours of testimony, I was emotionally and physically exhausted. Linda drove me home and stayed with me that evening, making sure I ate something and didn't spend the night obsessively replaying every question and answer. The defense's case lasted only 3 days. They called character witnesses who testified about Daniel's reputation as a caring son and competent veterinarian before his arrest. They brought in a psychiatrist who speculated that Melissa might have a personality disorder that led her to manipulate Daniel into participating in her schemes. They presented Daniel's financial records to argue that the transferred money had been related to legitimate practice expenses, though they couldn't explain the forged invoices and fake vendor accounts. But they didn't call Daniel or Melissa to testify. That decision told me everything I needed to know. If Daniel's story of being a concerned son trying to help his declining mother was true, he should have been eager to tell that story directly to the jury. His silence suggested that even his own attorney didn't trust him to testify without revealing something that would damage the defense. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Those 48 hours were the longest of my life. I stayed home with Justice and Grace, unable to focus on anything, jumping every time my phone rang. Linda came by both evenings to sit with me. Patricia Morrison called several times to update me on procedural matters and assure me that a long deliberation didn't necessarily mean bad news. When the call finally came that the jury had reached a verdict, I felt strangely detached, as if this were happening to someone else. Linda drove me to the courthouse where we met Patricia in the hallway outside the courtroom. Mr. Crawford approached us with a neutral expression that revealed nothing. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you've been incredibly brave throughout this process. Thank you for trusting the justice system." The courtroom filled quickly with reporters, spectators, and courthouse staff who had been following the case. Daniel and Melissa were brought in and seated at the defense table. Melissa was crying softly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Daniel stared straight ahead, his face emotionless, looking more like a stranger than someone who had once been my child. When the judge asked if the jury had reached a verdict, the forewoman stood. She was a woman in her 60s who reminded me a bit of myself, wearing practical clothes and sensible shoes, her gray hair cut short and no nonsense. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit elder abuse in the first degree, how do you find? We find the defendant Daniel Harrison guilty. On the charge of assault by means of poison, how do you find? We find the defendant Daniel Harrison guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, how do you find? We find the defendant Daniel Harrison guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, how do you find? We find the defendant Daniel Harrison guilty. On the charge of attempted fraud in obtaining conservatorship, how do you find? We find the defendant Daniel Harrison guilty. Guilty on all counts." The words echoed in my head like a bell. The verdicts for Melissa were identical. Guilty on every charge. As the judge thanked the jury and dismissed them, I felt Linda's hand squeeze mine. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." But it wasn't over, not really. The guilty verdicts meant Daniel and Melissa would go to prison, that justice had been served in the legal sense. But the emotional aftermath, the psychological healing, the reconstruction of a life built on trust that had been shattered, that work was just beginning. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Mr. Crawford explained that I would have the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement if I chose to, that I could address the court and explain how these crimes had affected my life. I spent those 6 weeks working with Dr. Torres to craft a statement that was honest without being vengeful, that expressed the full scope of harm without asking for mercy I didn't feel. I wanted the judge and Daniel and Melissa and everyone in that courtroom to understand what they had taken from me, not just the money or the health or the sense of safety, but something more fundamental. They had taken my ability to trust family, to believe in unconditional love, to feel secure in relationships I thought were based on genuine connection, rather than calculated manipulation. On the day of sentencing, I stood before the packed courtroom and read my statement. "My name is Catherine Harrison," I began. "Daniel is my only child. For 35 years I believed that meant something. I believed that no matter what challenges we faced, we would always have each other. I was wrong. For months, Daniel and Melissa drugged me while I trusted them. They stole from my business while I included them in my professional life. They took out life insurance on me and filed papers to have me declared incompetent, while I planned to transfer ownership of my practice to them. They tried to have my beloved dog killed while I believed they cared about my well-being." I paused, looking directly at Daniel for the first time since the verdicts. He was staring at his hands, refusing to meet my eyes. The worst part wasn't the physical harm or the financial theft. The worst part was the psychological manipulation, the systematic destruction of my ability to trust my own perceptions. For months I thought I was losing my mind. I questioned every decision, doubted every judgment, wondered if I was really as incompetent as Daniel claimed. That violation of my sense of self was worse than any physical attack could have been. Bailey, my dog, showed me more genuine love and loyalty in 3 years than Daniel showed in 35. Bailey's presence saved my life because his obvious health exposed Daniel's lies. A shelter dog I had rescued ended up rescuing me, while the son I had raised and loved and supported through everything tried to destroy me for money. I looked out at the courtroom, making eye contact with the jury members who had returned for sentencing, with the reporters taking notes, with Linda sitting in the front row. I don't ask for mercy for Daniel and Melissa. They showed me no mercy when they drugged me daily, when they stole from me systematically, when they plotted to take everything I had worked for. What I ask for is accountability. I ask that they face the full legal consequences of their choices, so that other families might be spared what I endured. And I ask that this case serve as a warning that elder abuse can happen in any family, at any economic level, perpetrated by people who seem loving and normal. The people who hurt me weren't strangers or obvious criminals. They were my son and daughter-in-law, people I had welcomed into my home and my heart. That's what makes this kind of abuse so devastating and so difficult to detect. As I returned to my seat, I noticed that several jurors were crying. Melissa was sobbing openly, though whether from remorse or fear of the sentence about to be imposed, I couldn't tell. Daniel remained expressionless, still refusing to look at me. The judge, a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and an iron voice, addressed the courtroom. This is one of the most disturbing cases of elder abuse I have encountered in 30 years on the bench. The defendants didn't just commit financial crimes. They engaged in systematic psychological and physical abuse of a woman who had loved and supported them. They showed no remorse, no recognition of wrongdoing, no acknowledgement of the profound harm they caused. She turned to Daniel and Melissa. You had every advantage. A mother who supported you financially and emotionally. A path to inheriting a valuable business, the education and opportunity that many people never receive. And you threw all of that away because you were too impatient and too greedy to wait for what would eventually have been yours. Your crimes were calculated and cruel, perpetrated over months with careful planning and documentation. You showed Catherine Harrison no mercy. This court will show you none. Daniel Harrison, you are sentenced to 25 years in state prison. Melissa Harrison, you are sentenced to 20 years in state prison. The sentences were longer than I had expected. As Daniel and Melissa were led away in handcuffs, Daniel finally looked at me. His expression was pure hatred, his lips forming words I couldn't hear but could easily interpret. The mask had finally fallen away completely. Whatever love he had pretended to feel for me had been revealed as the performance it always was. And in that moment of naked hostility, I felt something unexpected. Not pain or grief at the final confirmation that my son had never loved me, but relief. Relief that I no longer had to wonder if things could have been different, if I had failed him somehow, if there was something I could have done to save our relationship. Daniel had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. My job wasn't to save him or redeem him, or maintain the illusion of a family that had never really existed. My job was to rebuild my own life, to heal from what had been done to me, to create something authentic and valuable from the ruins of everything I had believed about family and love. As Linda and Patricia and I left the courthouse that day, stepping out into bright winter sunshine that felt like benediction, I knew the hardest part of my journey was still ahead. The trial was over, but the healing had just begun. 7 years have passed since that winter day when Daniel and Melissa were sentenced to prison. I am 68 now, and the life I have built in these years bears little resemblance to the one I thought I was living before that September morning when Dr. Chen's phone call changed everything. The practice continues to thrive under a partnership structure that includes Marcus Chen and Sarah Kim, along with 2 younger veterinarians I have mentored over the past 5 years. I still work 3 days a week, still perform surgeries, still find deep satisfaction in healing animals and comforting their owners. But I have also learned to prioritize my own well-being, to take vacations, to say no to demands that would have once felt like obligations I couldn't refuse. Justice and Grace are 7 now, middle-aged dogs with graying muzzles and the calm confidence that comes from years of being loved unconditionally. They still accompany me to the clinic several days a week, still provide therapy to nervous animals and comfort to grieving owners. But more importantly, they remind me every single day that love is measured by actions rather than words, by consistent presence rather than grand gestures, by the choice to show up authentically rather than the performance of expected roles. The foundation I created to help elderly pet owners has grown beyond anything I imagined. We now operate in 6 states, providing legal assistance, emergency pet boarding, and education about the warning signs of elder abuse involving companion animals. We have helped hundreds of people maintain their independence and their beloved pets when family members tried to separate them as a control tactic. Every person we assist feels like a small victory against the kind of cruelty Daniel and Melissa perpetrated. Linda remains my closest friend, still meeting me for Thursday dinners, still providing the kind of honest support that makes real friendship possible. Margaret, Charles's sister, has become family in ways that have healed some of the wounds left by Daniel's betrayal. We spend holidays together, share stories about Charles, and remind each other that chosen family can be stronger than biological connections. Dr. Torres helped me understand that healing from betrayal isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending the damage wasn't real. It's about integrating the experience into your life story, without letting it define you completely. I am more than what Daniel did to me. I am also the veterinarian who has healed thousands of animals, the mentor who has trained dozens of young professionals, the friend who shows up when people need support, the woman who chose courage over bitterness when faced with unimaginable betrayal. Daniel writes occasional letters from prison, always claiming innocence, always blaming others for his situation. I stopped reading them years ago. There is no relationship to salvage, no reconciliation that would be healthy or genuine. He made his choices and I have made mine. My choice is to build a life based on truth rather than obligation, on earned trust rather than assumed connection, on authentic love rather than performed devotion. Melissa was released on parole last year after serving 15 years. I don't know where she is or what she's doing, and I don't want to know. She is part of a past I have moved beyond, a chapter that taught me painful but valuable lessons about the difference between appearing to care and actually caring. The lesson Bailey taught me that September morning, the lesson that saved my life, was simple but profound. Pay attention to what people do rather than what they say. Animals understand this instinctively, because they can't be fooled by words or manipulated by guilt. Bailey knew something was wrong with Daniel long before I did, and his wariness should have been my warning. Now I listen to what my dogs tell me about people. I watch how individuals treat animals and service workers, and anyone they perceive as having less power. I notice the gap between someone's stated values and their actual behavior. These observations have protected me from potential exploitation several times in the years since Daniel's conviction, have helped me identify people who should not be trusted with access to my business or my life. The veterinary community has been incredibly supportive throughout my recovery. When the story first became public, I worried that people would judge me or question my competence for not recognizing what my own son was doing. Instead, I found compassion and understanding from colleagues who recognized that manipulation by trusted family members is uniquely difficult to detect. Several other veterinarians have privately shared their own experiences of family betrayal, creating a network of support among people who understand the specific challenges of maintaining professional competence while navigating personal trauma. I have been invited to speak at veterinary conferences about elder abuse and the role pets play in protecting their owners from exploitation. These presentations are difficult but important, helping other professionals recognize warning signs and understand their ethical obligations when they suspect a client is being abused by family members. The greatest gift these years have given me is the understanding that family is something you build through choice and sustained care, rather than something you inherit through biology. My family now includes Linda and Margaret, Marcus and Sarah and Jenny, the volunteers at my foundation, the colleagues who have stood by me, the clients who have trusted me with their beloved animals. These people have shown me what real loyalty looks like, what genuine love feels like, what chosen family means. They don't love me because they have to or because they want something from me. They love me because of who I actually am, including my flaws and mistakes and the damage left by betrayal. At 68, I am more alive and more purposeful than I was at 61. I know who I can trust and why. I understand the difference between reasonable caution and paranoid isolation, between protecting myself and closing myself off from genuine connection. I have learned to honor my own boundaries, to prioritize my well-being, to recognize that taking care of myself isn't selfish but necessary for having anything valuable to offer others. Justice and Grace teach me this lesson daily through their uncomplicated devotion and their ability to live fully in each moment without dwelling on past hurts, or worrying about future betrayals. When I think about that September morning when Dr. Chan called about Bailey, I feel gratitude rather than anger. Gratitude that she trusted her professional instincts enough to question Daniel's story. Gratitude that Bailey was healthy and his obvious well-being exposed the lies. Gratitude that I survived to build this richer, more authentic life. Daniel tried to kill Bailey because he represented everything Daniel couldn't manipulate or control. That attempt to eliminate an innocent creature became the catalyst for exposing evil that might otherwise have succeeded. In trying to destroy what I loved most, Daniel inadvertently saved my life. The coffee I drink now is prepared by my own hands, in my own kitchen, with ingredients I purchased myself. This small act of self-sufficiency might seem paranoid to someone who hasn't experienced what I have, but it represents something important. I no longer blindly trust. I verify. I protect myself. I maintain boundaries. And within those boundaries, I have created space for genuine relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation, on honest communication rather than manipulation, on actions that match words. That is the life Daniel's betrayal gave me, the unexpected gift hidden inside the trauma. He meant to destroy me, but instead he freed me from illusions I had been living with for decades. He showed me who he really was, and in doing so he taught me to recognize authentic love when I encounter it. For that painful lesson delivered at such high cost, I am ultimately grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.